So one final thing we're going to be talking about today is one of the biggest topics in geopolitics today. That is the tensions on the Russia-Ukraine border. There have been what have been called "quote unquote" frank talks between Secretary of State Antony Blinken of the United States and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov about the buildup of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border. Some 100,000 Russian military personnel are now stationed around that border. There are many who believe that an invasion of the Ukraine by Russia is imminent. Of course, back in 2014, Russia occupied the Crimean Peninsula and subsequently annexed it. Parts of eastern Ukraine have been under occupation by separatist forces who are pro-Russia since then as well, although they have not, at time of recording, acceded to the Russian Federation. What have you made of this so far, Kit? Do you think we're looking at a potentially deadly situation here in Ukraine?
I wouldn't be in a position to say either way, really. What I have seen from the reports that I've watched and that I've read is that there is definitely a will to fight in Ukraine as well. I think one report I've seen, I think from Channel 4 News was interviewing people who were training with assault rifles, that were training in guerrilla tactics. You also have a Ukrainian president who's saying very bluntly, yes, I will fight. So there is definitely a will to fight in Ukraine as well. The buildup of troops on the border in Russia is very disturbing. I do think that Germany's unwillingness to perhaps foster a more hard opposition to Russia's actions may well embolden them. I do know there's other European countries, I think, have now moved away from that stance, haven't they? They've moved to, not against Germany, but away from Germany's position in that regard.
I believe the Netherlands recently
that's it,
has,
yeah. But I think certainly from Ukraine, the impression that I get is that there definitely is a will to fight in Ukraine, and that if Russia does move soldiers into westward into Ukraine, then they are going to be opposed.
Beg your pardon, I was on mute there for a second. One thing we were talking about just before we came here and started recording is a statement put out by a UK organisation called the Stop the War Coalition. I'm just going to read out a part of this and we're going to break this down. So they say, British politicians are playing with fire, stoking up the tension around Ukraine. As the danger grows of a conflict breaking out between Russia and Ukraine, following an apparent lack of progress in negotiations with the USA, Tories and Labour are outbidding each other in pointless bellicosity. The government has sold fresh weaponry to Ukraine, and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has made a saber-rattling speech in Australia. Shadow Ministers David Lammy and John Healey have flown to Kiev to support Ukrainian resistance to Russia. Britain should be advancing serious diplomatic proposals to defuse the tension and seek a solution to the crisis rather than ratcheting it up. This involves taking both Ukraine's integrity and Russian security concerns seriously. Let's break this down then. Russian security concerns. What are we talking about here?
It's very difficult to say, I think, with Russia's security concerns. The instinct would certainly be to wonder how valid they are in a domestic setting in Russia, or whether this is actually trying to find an excuse, maybe Russia trying to find an excuse to move westwards. Whether there is a movement in Ukraine, whether there's a group in Ukraine that would have the capability of actually threatening Russia, for example, in major Russian cities, is up for debate, I think. So my immediate instinct would be to think, well, is this trying to find an excuse?
Absolutely. And some context is that one of President Putin's demands is that Ukraine be barred from joining NATO. Obviously, there are countries on Russia's border, such as the Baltic states, that are NATO members and are members of the European Union. Putin obviously doesn't want NATO influence spreading further east. But to use the term security concerns, I think is a little loaded, when I think the country that has to be the most concerned about its security right now is the Ukraine itself. And, you know, any anti-imperialist worth the name should be fighting first and foremost for Ukraine's right to self-determination right now. I think that should be unequivocal. And if that means, you know, offering direct support in arming Ukraine to help it defend itself, I think that is a legitimate position to take as an anti-imperialist.